People are eating themselves. Things started to spiral out of control right after I left my job. One morning, I woke up to hear Mike calling me from downstairs. When I went down, I saw the TV broadcasting an emergency news alert about a bizarre new disease, self-cannibalism. Honestly, the disease itself didn't shock me, but Mike's reaction sure did. It's not even a pandemic yet, and people are already losing their minds," he said, smirking. "Soon they'll be all worked up, paranoid and offended, just because someone hints they might be infected. Hilarious, don't you think?" As I watched the news, he suddenly chuckled. It wasn't a loud laugh, more like a soft, smug sound, but it carried enough sarcasm to make my skin crawl. Disgusted, I couldn't hold back a sharp comment. "You've never cared about anyone's life, you idiot," I snapped. From that day forward, things only got worse. It's been 3 years since that first news report aired, and honestly, it feels like a return to the COVID-19 era. You've heard me right. It's eerily similar, except there's no cure for this self-cannibalism disease yet. Don't get me wrong, doctors and scientists are doing everything they can, but this virus is unlike anything they've ever seen. I get it, it's hard to watch people suffer and not be able to fix it. That's one of the reasons I quit my job. The helplessness was too much to bear. Now I work at a small veterinary clinic, taking care of animals instead. They're simpler, and frankly, easier to help. Life has settled into a kind of routine. I get up, go to work, come home, and crash. Today was no different. When I woke up, it was already 7 a.m. I still felt drained, but I couldn't afford to be late again, so I dragged myself out of bed. My health is improving, barely, but one look in the mirror tells a different story. I'm skinny, the kind of thin where bones press against the fabric of my uniform. The dark circles under my eyes have become a permanent fixture, and no amount of concealer can hide them anymore. While I stood there lost in thought, Mike's voice cut through the silence. "Sam, breakfast is ready," he called. I turned to see him standing in the doorway of my bedroom, looking genuinely concerned. Mike, whose full name is Michael, isn't really my dad. He's an old coworker who decided to take me in after I quit my last job. Sure, he's been looking out for me, but something about him feels off. Mike's good-looking and seems nice enough, but there's this unshakable feeling that he has ulterior motives. I don't have the energy to question him, though, so I ignore his hovering and focus on getting through my day. I made it to the clinic on time. Just as I was settling in, a coworker approached me with a grin and handed me a list. "Hey, morning! Can you take the new patients today? You know I'm terrible with snakes," he said, laughing nervously. "Promise I'll owe you a drink." I sighed, nodded, and headed off to see my assignments. My workload wasn't too heavy today, so helping out didn't seem like a bad deal, except for one thing. Lately, more and more people have been bringing in snakes that are eating themselves. And 9 times out of 10, these snake owners show similar symptoms. Bandaged fingers, weird lip movements. It's a pattern I can't unsee. The clinic has dealt with so many cases like this that we've established a set of secret rules for handling them. While examining snakes, observe their owners closely for behaviors like bandaged fingers or odd mouth movements, lips closed but twisting unnaturally. If there are no signs, proceed as usual. But if you notice anything suspicious, press the hidden button under the nearest wooden desk to summon the rapid response team. After pressing the button, hide immediately. Every day feels like walking on eggshells. But this is my life now, one strange day at a time. You'd think a place like this would feel safe, but you'd be wrong. If a patient suspects you're onto them, they can turn violent in a heartbeat. We've already had a few employees attacked, and honestly, the rules don't teach us how to act convincingly enough to avoid suspicion. Maybe that's why my naturally cold and detached demeanor has been a weird advantage. Even when they figure out I'm suspicious of them, I've always managed to slip away before things got physical. Am I scared? Of course I am. But at this point, fear has become a routine part of the job. After grabbing my tools and equipment, I headed over to one of the snake owners. As I approached, a deep sense of dread hit me like a gut punch, screaming, "Get out of here!" The man looked sketchy: oversized jacket, long pants, sunglasses, and a face mask. He was covered head to toe like a celebrity dodging paparazzi. He must have noticed my hesitation because, before I could even speak, he offered an explanation. "Oh, don't worry. I've just got a nasty cold. Really bad one," he said, forcing a laugh. "Had to bundle up, you know? Anyway, shall we take a look at my lovely pet?" The more he spoke, the more uneasy I felt. To make matters worse, the cage he brought was draped in black fabric, concealing whatever was inside. My instincts screamed that this encounter wasn't going to end well, but I had no choice. If I tried to send him away, he could lash out, putting everyone else in danger. So, I swallowed my fear and led him to a private exam room, hoping for the best but bracing for the worst. Once inside, he pulled back the fabric to reveal the snake. It was knotted up like a tangled rope, with its head ferociously biting its own tail. It was a disturbing sight, even for someone who's seen this kind of thing before. Trying to stay professional, I asked what had happened. "Oh, that's on me," he said nonchalantly. "I was just messing around with it, and well, you see what happened." My stomach churned. Every instinct I had told me to bolt, but I knew there was no way I could outrun him in my current state. He could attack at any moment. Keeping my expression neutral, I casually made my way to the wooden desk, discreetly pressing the hidden button underneath. I prayed the rapid response team would get here before this turned into my final shift. Outwardly, I stayed calm, but inside, panic churned. Sensing my silence, the man started talking again. "Doctor, I heard that snakes only eat themselves when they're stressed. Is that true?" I knew this conversation was heading somewhere dangerous, but I played along. "Yes," I replied. "Is there something specific you'd like to know?" Before I could react, he rolled up his sleeve, revealing an arm so badly mangled you could see the bone. I froze. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't think. The man's voice dragged me back to reality. "I'm stressed too," he said, his tone dark. "Just like my pet. So tell me, Doc, why do you think I'm infected? Do you have any idea what your assumptions have done to me? Sending me to those people, ruining my life? Do you even know what it's like in there?" His voice grew louder, angrier, and before I knew it, he lunged at me. I tried to escape, but he was too fast. He slammed me to the ground, pinning me beneath his weight, his hands closing around my throat. I clawed at him, gasping for air, my vision blurring. The last thing I remember before blacking out was the sound of the security team bursting in, their voices cutting through the chaos as they wrestled him away. "I'm not infected!" the man screamed, thrashing as they restrained him. "This is a mistake. Doctor, please listen to me." It was like a scene from my past, playing out all over again. The memories I buried clawed their way to the surface, and I hated how familiar it all felt. When I woke up, I was lying in a hospital bed. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the sterile room. Judging by how bright it was, I figured it was late at night. I had no idea how long I'd been unconscious, but one thing was certain: the hospital was the last place I wanted to be right now. I needed to leave, immediately. I sat up, glancing around the room. To my surprise and relief, Michael was there, slumped in a chair beside the bed. For the first time, his presence actually comforted me. "Mike," I whispered, shaking him awake. "We need to get out of here." Michael was slumped in the chair beside my bed, dozing off like the whole world hadn't gone to hell outside. The moment he woke up, he gave me a smile. Whether it was genuine or not, I couldn't tell, and honestly, I didn't care. Right now, he was the only person who could get me out of here. Before he had a chance to start with small talk, I leaned in and clamped a hand over his mouth. "Don't you dare say a word. Get us out of here now, or we're both screwed," I whispered harshly. To his credit, Michael didn't argue. He nodded, and we slipped out of the room together. The hallway was eerily silent. Not a soul in sight. The dim, flickering lights barely lit the way, casting long, unsettling shadows. The air felt cold, heavy, like something awful was lurking just out of view. Michael and I exchanged a glance, and he muttered under his breath, "I'm not taking any chances." We'd watched enough horror movies to know the smartest move was to stay put until daylight. After a quick, mutual agreement, we retreated back to the patient room, locking the door behind us. For now, it seemed like the only option was to sit tight and figure out a way to escape without drawing attention. Something had clearly gone wrong, terribly wrong, but even Michael looked clueless about what was happening. I didn't bother asking. The fear gnawing at me left no room for pointless questions. As we sat side by side in the oppressive quiet, Michael finally broke the silence. "You doing okay, Sam? I was scared out of my mind when I got the call from the hospital." Sam isn't my real name. Michael had somehow come up with it on his own after learning I grew up in a colder region. No matter how many times I tried correcting him, he stubbornly stuck with it. Eventually, I just gave up and let him call me whatever he wanted. I sighed and decided to answer his question by explaining what had happened earlier. That led us into a deeper conversation about the past. Before all this, I was a doctor. It was my dream job, the one I had worked tirelessly to achieve. I'd spent most of my life studying, competing, and clawing my way into a prestigious medical school. Being a doctor was supposed to be my calling, a chance to save lives and make a difference. But the reality was far more brutal. The pressure was unrelenting, and after a few years, I began to crack. Things only got worse when I stumbled upon what I believed was a new, horrifying disease. It happened on a rainy day. A patient was admitted to my hospital, screaming incoherently and thrashing around. His behavior was so aggressive that we had no choice but to sedate him just to run some basic tests. The stench hit us first, a rotten, almost metallic odor, and then we saw the state of his body. Decaying chunks of flesh clung to his skin like raw meat left out too long. At first, my colleagues assumed he'd been attacked, but the examination revealed something far more chilling. The man had torn off his own flesh. I suspected psychosis at first and worked under that assumption, keeping the patient restrained to prevent further self-harm. As the days passed and I monitored him, my gut told me this was something different, something new. I compiled a report, outlining the possibility of a novel disease. "The incubation period for self-cannibalism disease is exactly 2 weeks," I told Michael. My voice wavered as the memories came flooding back. "God, I can't even talk about it right now. Hold on, let me write it down." I grabbed a pen and paper from the bedside table and began scribbling down the details, the words spilling out as fast as I could think of them. Meanwhile, Michael sat quietly, watching me. He's 25 years older than me, standing a solid 6 feet tall with an air of authority that had earned him respect at the hospital. When I quit my job, he'd offered to take me in. At the time, I couldn't tell if he was acting out of guilt or trying to keep tabs on me, afraid I'd expose the truth about the disease. Either way, he treated me well, almost like I was his own son. I finished writing and handed the paper to him. It read, "Symptoms. Early stage, day 1 to 5 back pain and spinal discomfort, itching or numbness in the pinky finger, instability in hand joints." Michael scanned the paper, his face unreadable. For a moment, the room felt even colder than before. Stage 2, day 6 to 10 hands become entirely paralyzed. Uncontrollable self-biting of sensitive areas like hands, lips, and other pain-prone regions begins. Nervous instability escalates, accompanied by continuous hallucinations. Final stage, day 11 to 14 total loss of consciousness, with the individual completely consumed by self-biting behavior. Complications. Over time, fully infected patients experience severe physical transformations that seem to aid in self-cannibalism. Elongated neck, fingers, and toes, sharper teeth resembling those of predators, excessively dilated pupils, and more. After reading the list, Michael's first response wasn't about the horrifying symptoms but rather my handwriting. "Man, your writing's hideous," he muttered, shaking his head. I wanted to yell at him, but the thought of my voice attracting whatever might be lurking outside made me hold back. Instead, I grabbed the nearest pillow and hurled it at him. He chuckled softly, dodging the weak attempt, but his face quickly turned serious. They never told us anything like this, Michael said, his tone grim. All they said was you were nuts. I stared at him, silent. At this point, I wished he were right, that I was crazy, that I'd made this all up in my head. But no, this was real. I'd stumbled upon something no one wanted to acknowledge, and for that, I could have been killed. Somehow, though, I was still alive. Part of me suspected Michael had a hand in keeping me safe, but I didn't dare dig too deep. Some questions are better left unanswered. Michael broke the silence again, asking, "Do you ever think about finding a cure?" I shook my head, weary from years of hopelessness. They're the ones who drove me out. Why the hell would I care now? He didn't flinch at my harsh words, just nodded with a resigned sigh. Michael never seemed to mind my outbursts, always respecting my decisions despite reminding me of my potential. And I did feel regret for all the hard work and sacrifices I'd thrown away. But what choice did I have? Pursuing the truth came with a cost I wasn't willing to pay anymore. Michael gave me a soft smile, the kind meant to lift someone's spirits. "It's fine," he said gently. "But it's not healthy to keep all this bottled up. You can talk to me." He had a point, and I couldn't brush off his kindness forever. Reluctantly, I agreed. "All right. Just a little." I explained my initial theory, that it might be autophagia caused by psychological issues. But as the brain scans came in, they revealed anomalies I couldn't explain. I started to suspect prion, abnormal proteins much smaller than viruses. I dug deeper, researching relentlessly. While the disease shared some characteristics with prion, it didn't behave the same. The most alarming part: the victims' bodies underwent drastic physical changes. "It's like it doesn't just destroy tissue," I said, voice low. "It alters DNA. Can you imagine? A protein that rewrites genetic code. It's unreal. A phenomenon, really." Before I could continue, a loud bang echoed from the door, making us both jump. Michael stiffened, his posture tense as he gestured for me to stay quiet. "Hide," he whispered, motioning toward the bed. Without hesitation, I scrambled underneath, my heart pounding. A voice called out from the hallway. "Is anyone in there?" "Don't worry, I'm Detective Kevin. I'm here to help." A detective? In a hospital? That didn't sit right with me. Michael must have felt the same because he didn't respond. Minutes passed in tense silence before the so-called detective broke through the door. Michael acted instantly, striking him from behind and knocking him out cold. As the man crumpled to the floor, I crawled out from under the bed, my eyes wide as Michael reached down and retrieved a gun from the stranger's holster. "We need to go." "No," Michael said, grabbing my arm. The sun was beginning to rise, casting faint light over the chaos outside. It was the perfect chance to escape, and we weren't about to waste it. As we ran through the dim hallways, I felt a pang of guilt for leaving the unconscious man behind. But there was no telling who he really was or what he wanted. Survival came first. We kept running, the oppressive darkness thinning as daylight crept in. With every step, I prayed that nothing else would go wrong and that somehow, we'd make it home safely. I think my school is haunted. It happened on a rainy day in December during my junior year of high school, back in 2023. I remember it clearly. I was in 7th period, just after lunch, when I asked my teacher if I could use the restroom. Usually, the bathrooms at school were crowded with kids messing around, skipping class, or just hanging out. But when I walked in that day, it was completely empty. Honestly, that was the best feeling ever. I'm the kind of guy who hates being seen while handling my business, so I always head straight for a stall, even if the whole place is empty. That's exactly what I did. Went in, locked the door, and got to it. I'd just finished when I heard it, a girl's voice, soft but unsettling, whispering, "Hey," right behind my ear. My heart jumped, and I spun around, expecting to see someone standing there. But there was no one. The stall door was still locked, and when I stepped out to check, the other stalls were wide open and empty. I hadn't been in there for more than a minute, and I hadn't heard anyone else come in or leave. The bathroom was eerily silent, like no one had ever even been there. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I must have imagined it. Maybe my mind was playing tricks on me, I thought. But then, as I opened the door to leave, I heard another voice, even closer this time. "Help," it said in that same soft, creepy tone. I froze. Slowly I turned back, and that's when I saw it, a shadowy figure, just standing there behind me in the mirror. My stomach dropped. I looked around, but the space was empty. I didn't stick around to investigate. I threw the door open and rushed back to class, my mind racing. I didn't tell anyone about what happened, not then, not ever. In all 4 years of going to that school, that was the one and only time something like this happened to me. I kept using that bathroom afterward, but it was as if nothing had ever happened. No voices, no shadows, nothing. Just that one chilling moment that stayed with me ever since. Well, ladies, the question of the hour: what car should we take on this grand little road trip of ours? John Darling asked, gesturing proudly toward their impressive collection of vehicles. Dad's Chevy Nomad might be the sensible choice, but the Nova's got that extra bit of pizzazz. And let's be real, if we're aiming for pure style, nothing beats a classic Cadillac. The Darlings' collection wasn't exactly acquired through legitimate means. Over the years, they had inherited vehicles from their unfortunate victims, repurposing them into tools for their macabre endeavors. John took pride in keeping their favorites in pristine condition, often upgrading them with his own mechanical inventions when standard parts just wouldn't cut it. That's hardly a fair question, John Darling. You know I have a soft spot for the Corvette, Lisa Darling said, her eyes narrowing playfully. It's the ultimate American sports car, sleek, fast, and timeless. You bought it for me, remember? The first car you actually purchased. I'll never forget the thrill of running down my first victim in it. True, but you're particular about where the blood ends up with the Corvette, John replied with a sly grin, nudging the limp, gagged figure lying at their feet. The girl barely reacted, her empty stare fixed on the floor as if she'd already surrendered to whatever fate awaited her. You're meticulous about keeping the interior spotless, aren't you, Lisa Darling? Well, of course. Lisa shot back, lightly prodding the girl with her toe to see if there was any life left in her. But it's not like I haven't mastered the art of keeping upholstery pristine. Besides, if we run into Veronica and her ridiculous little purple Porsche, wouldn't it be better to be in something that both outshines and outruns her? But this is a family road trip, Mommy Darling, chimed in Sarah Darling, her voice dripping with exaggerated sweetness as she stepped gracefully over the prone victim like she was luggage. Her jet-black eyes gleamed with excitement as she scanned the lineup of cars. And the Corvette? Not exactly family-friendly. It gives off a bit of a new money vibe. We need something more refined, more elegant. Sure, the Bel Air and Oldsmobile 88 are charming, but Daddy Darling is right. This is a special trip. We need to take the Cadillac. Plus, it's his favorite, and he's the only one of us who can legally drive, after all. Looks like you're outvoted, Lisa Darling, John said with a triumphant grin, slipping his arm around her waist as he led her toward the chosen car. Modern Cadillacs might blend into the sea of luxury vehicles these days, but a classic like this? It's a symbol of refinement. Even the presidential state car is still a Cadillac, you know. The Corvette will always be the more iconic car, but I'll admit the Cadillac makes more sense for today's plans, Lisa said with a hint of reluctance. But if anyone asks, my car is still the Vette. Sarah Darling, I'm riding up front with your father. Naturally, Mommy Darling. It's only proper for children and VIPs to take the back seat, Sarah replied with a smug smile, holding her head high. As for our guests, John said, effortlessly hoisting their victim onto his shoulder. She'll have to ride in the trunk. She'd draw too much attention in her current state. That's perfectly fine, Daddy darling. I'd like to keep a back seat open anyway, just in case we pick up a hitchhiker, Sarah said brightly. John chuckled as he loaded the girl into the trunk. Don't get your hopes up, Sarah darling. Hitchhikers are a rare breed these days. Afraid of serial killers, I'd imagine, Lisa said dryly as she settled into the passenger seat. Which is ironic, considering there aren't as many of us around anymore either. Damn modern forensics, John muttered as he heaved the girl into the trunk, arranging a few suitcases around her to keep her hidden. It's nearly impossible for a beginner to get started these days. A single mass shooting is about the best they can manage. Sure, that keeps the sheep scared, but serial killings? Now, those create a far deeper kind of paranoia. You know exactly who the shooter is the second they start spraying bullets, but your neighbor? Your coworker? They could be a killer, and you'd never know it. With a satisfying thud, he slammed the trunk shut and locked it before opening the passenger doors. He gestured for his daughter, Sarah, to climb into the back seat and for his sister, Lisa, to take the front. Settling into the driver's seat, he started the car with a turn of the ignition key. It's been a while since we made the trip to the Shrine of Moros, John said, his voice tinged with anticipation. I'm sure the Baal will be eager to see how much you've grown, Sarah. The perpetually preteen girl grinned at him through the rearview mirror, her dark, fluid eyes glinting with a hint of mischief. Oh, don't be fooled by my sweet little girl act, Daddy darling. I've grown plenty, in ways you can't see. Her irises shimmered ominously for a moment, a subtle show of the power surging beneath her deceptively innocent exterior. John smirked but didn't comment, his attention shifting to the control panel for their garage door opener. He flipped through the preset destinations until he landed on a portal location near the shrine. Close, but not too close. It wouldn't do to draw unnecessary attention to their sacred spot. Here we go, he announced as the door creaked open, revealing a dreary November landscape just beyond their playroom. Rain fell steadily, casting the scene in shades of gray. This should get us where we need to go without much trouble. Ugh, why is the outside world always miserable when we're trying to have a family outing? Lisa groaned, pulling out a flask and taking a long swig. It's just a little rain, Lisa darling, John said, switching on the windshield wipers. We've endured much worse. I like the rain, Sarah chimed in, her tone thoughtful. It's one of life's necessities, yet it can so easily become destructive. Isn't it amazing how something essential can turn on us, unleashing chaos and destruction for no reason at all? It's poetic, really, John agreed, steering the Cadillac smoothly out of the garage. Once more onto the breach. The rain showed no signs of letting up, much to Lisa's irritation and Sarah's quiet delight. While Lisa brooded, Sarah gazed out the window, finding a strange beauty in the desolate November landscape. The trees were bare, the flowers gone, and the snow had yet to arrive, leaving the world in a stark, quiet limbo. To her, it wasn't lifeless. It was a moment of pause, a break from the relentless cycle of seasons. The absence of color and activity wasn't a loss but a reminder to appreciate the fleeting nature of beauty. Winter, spring, summer, and fall would all come again, but this in-between moment of stillness was its own kind of gift. Of course, she kept these thoughts to herself. They weren't nearly morbid enough for her taste. As they drove farther down the increasingly desolate highway, the rain intensified. Pools of muddy water collected in potholes, sending up great splashes as the Cadillac barreled through. Aren't you glad we didn't take the Corvette now, Lisa darling? John teased, grinning at her. These roads are no place for a low-riding sports car. Honestly, I'm starting to think Uncle Larry's surplus army Jeep would have been a better choice. With these puddles, maybe even an amphicar. Lisa scowled, watching another wave of filthy water spray up against the windows. The state of this road is a disgrace, she snapped. Just another example of the tragedy of the commons. You'd never see the roads in our playroom get this bad, unless it was part of a hunt. Are people really so opposed to privatized services that they'd rather endure this than deal with the occasional toll booth? Lisa grumbled as the car jostled over yet another pothole. I think the bumpy roads make it more exciting, Mommy darling. Sarah chimed in, bouncing slightly in her seat. And with bad weather like this, it ups the chances of seeing a car accident. That's always fun. John squinted through the windshield, his eyes narrowing. Don't get too excited, Sarah darling, but I think I see someone walking up ahead. Really? Sarah squealed, leaning forward to catch a better look. Sure enough, there was a man trudging along the shoulder of the road, his dark green raincoat soaked and a matching duffel bag slung across his back. He walked with determination, seemingly unfazed by the relentless downpour. In weather like this? He's got to be a drifter, Lisa mused, her lips curling into a mischievous smile. Easy prey. He's not thumbing for a ride, though, stubborn type, I'd say. That might make him more entertaining. Oh, can we pick him up, Daddy darling? Please, please, please? Sarah begged, practically vibrating with anticipation. John chuckled. We can offer him a lift, but if he says no, that's the end of it. We've got a schedule to keep, we don't want to be late to the shrine. As the Cadillac approached, John pulled over just ahead of the man. Sarah wasted no time, flinging her door open and sticking her head out into the rain. Hi there, mister, she called, her voice somehow cheerful even over the storm. Need a ride? The man hesitated briefly before jogging to the car, climbing in quickly to escape the rain. He shook the water from his hair as he pulled his hood down. Thanks a lot. If you could drop me off at the next truck stop, I'd really appreciate it, he said, his voice tinged with gratitude. Oh, it's no trouble, John replied, merging back onto the highway. You headed to Toronto, or somewhere close? Yeah, Toronto, the man said, glancing around the spacious interior. Only place around here that's not just farmland, right? John laughed. Practically New York, but with poutine. I'm sure New York has poutine too, John darling, Lisa quipped, taking another sip from her flask. Not that we'd ever go looking for it. We're more into home cooking, given our unique culinary preferences. You weren't seriously planning to walk to Toronto, were you, stranger? If I had to, the man admitted. Figured I could make it in a few days, but the weather clearly had other plans. His eyes darted around the car. Does this thing not have seat belts? Of course not, John said, grinning. This is a '57 Cadillac, made in Detroit during the city's glory days. You don't ruin a classic like this with modern nonsense. Isn't that illegal? Especially with a kid in the car? The man asked, his tone skeptical. School buses don't have seatbelts, and they're full of kids. Can't be all that necessary, right? Lisa interjected smoothly. And even if they were, we're not big fans of seatbelts, Sarah added, her dark eyes glinting with something otherworldly. People today are too afraid of risks. Great men thrive on danger, and the weak? They're meant to be weeded out by it. Shielding the weak and limiting the strong only makes everyone worse off. The man shifted uneasily in his seat, his gaze flickering to Sarah's strange eyes. You sure you're okay with me back here, near your sister? Oh, don't worry about Sarah darling, John said with a grin. She doesn't bite. That's what Lisa darling's here for. By the way, I'm John. What do we call you, friend? Garland, the man said, settling in. Nice to meet you, Garland. So tell me, what led you to set out for Toronto on foot? John asked, steering the car carefully through a large puddle. Bus fare can't be that hard to scrape together, can it? It was kind of a spur-of-the-moment thing, Garland replied, shrugging. I just needed to move, so I packed a bag, picked a direction, and started walking. Adventurous, John remarked, his tone light but his eyes sharp in the rearview mirror. I like that, John said with an approving nod. Let me guess, you're hoping a change of scenery might bring a change of fortune too, right? Something like that, Garland replied, his gaze shifting to the rain-streaked windows. The towering pines outside bent and swayed under the relentless push of the wind, their silhouettes blurred by the downpour. "What do you suppose it feels like?" Sarah piped up, her voice soft but curious. "To be a tree? Standing tall and proud for centuries, only to be snapped in half by one bad gust of wind during a storm? To seem so invincible for so long, only to be destroyed by forces far beyond your control? I don't think trees think about stuff like that," Garland replied, looking slightly uneasy. "And honestly, you're a bit young to be thinking about it, too." "Oh, our little Sarah has always had a flair for philosophy," Lisa said, lighting up with pride. "Sarah darling, what do you make of our guest here deciding to accept our offer? He was free when he was walking, but freedom turned out to be too harsh, so he traded it for a bit of comfort, without much thought to the risks," Sarah said with a smug little smile. "One of the pillars of Western philosophy, after all, is that those who sacrifice freedom for safety deserve either. That's also why we don't have seatbelts." "Homeschooled, huh?" Garland said, raising an eyebrow. It's obvious, isn't it?" Lisa replied with a laugh, flicking open her Zippo lighter to ignite a cigarette. The sweet scent of tobacco quickly filled the cabin. "Public schools are a disaster, about as well maintained as the roads out here. And private schools? They could never provide the kind of specialized education Sarah needs. Honestly, if it weren't for our Uncle Larry stepping in to fill the gaps in James's and my own education, I shudder to think where we'd be now." "Oh, where are my manners? Can I offer you a smoke, Garland?" No thanks," he said awkwardly, waving his hand. "And I'm pretty sure it's illegal to smoke with kids in the car." "Ridiculous! What do you expect me to do, toss my sweet little girl out into this storm?" Lisa scoffed. "How is pouring rain better than a little smoke? People today really don't think things through. Daddy darling, even though I already know the answer, I have to ask, are we there yet?" Sarah asked in a syrupy voice. "Almost, Sarah darling," John replied, signaling to make a turn. "The turn-off is just up here." Garland squinted ahead, but all he could see was a narrow gap between two trees, barely wide enough for the car. One tree had a rusty sign that read private property, no trespassing, while the other bore a matching sign, dead end, keep out. "All these years, and no one's bothered to take those signs down," John remarked as he turned the wheel and veered to the left. "This road has definitely seen better days." As they passed between the trees, Garland felt a sudden, inexplicable shudder ripple through him. It left him off balance for a moment, so much so that he almost didn't notice the rain had completely stopped. The sky, however, had grown darker, and the forest around them was little more than a skeletal silhouette against the deepening gloom. The paved road was gone, replaced by an overgrown dirt path winding its way into the trees. Where exactly are we?" Garland asked, leaning forward to get a better look. "Didn't you see the sign?" "Private property," John said lightly. "So private, in fact, that only a select few can even perceive it, let alone remember it. Hallowed ground might be the term you're looking for." "I wouldn't go calling it hallowed, John darling," Lisa said, exhaling a thin stream of smoke. "Uncle Larry first brought James and me here when we were kids, and even back then, this place was something else. Good to know some things never change." As Garland's eyes adjusted to the dim light, he noticed the branches of the towering trees. They weren't empty. They were impaled with the charred, blackened remains of human bodies. Though most of the bodies appeared ancient, their charred remains blackened by time. They were surrounded by swarms of fresh, bloated flies, buzzing with morbid energy. "What the hell, what the hell, what the hell?" Garland stammered, his voice rising as he pressed himself back against the seat. His eyes darted wildly between the grotesque scene outside the car and the unnerving calm of the family inside. "I couldn't agree more, it lacks subtlety," John said casually, his tone as matter-of-fact as if they were discussing bad wallpaper. "When we first stumbled across our own playroom, it wasn't much better. Thankfully, Lisa darling has quite the knack for making a house a home." "Oh, you're too kind, John darling," Lisa said, a hint of a blush creeping into her cheeks. "Unfortunately, my talents don't extend much beyond the domestic realm, so there's not much I can do with this place." But Sarah darling? I imagine she's quite in tune with the energy here. What do you think, sweetie? Any updates you'd like to make to the decor? It is awfully quiet, isn't it? Sarah mused, her black, fluid like irises rippling as she focused her gaze on the bodies. Suddenly, every one of them began to writhe, their blackened forms jerking violently as if possessed. And then they screamed. A deafening cacophony of tortured cries echoed through the forest, the twisted remains flailing in agony against their impalement. The branches groaned under the strain of their movements, threatening to snap. Much better, Sarah said with a satisfied smile, her voice almost serene. Corpses can be so peaceful, like a fallen tree, just returning to the earth. But living victims, defying every natural law to exist in perpetual torment? Now that's true art. Don't you agree, Mr. Garland? Garland's breath quickened. His eyes darted to the rear window, searching desperately for a way out. The path they'd come down was still visible, albeit faint. Without thinking, he flung the door open, abandoning his duffel bag as he bolted into the dark forest. The rain had stopped, but his frantic footfalls splashed in the soggy underbrush. He hadn't gone far when a sharp crack sounded overhead. A massive branch splintered from a nearby tree, sending one of the screaming, thrashing figures crashing to the ground in front of him. He skidded to a halt, watching in horror as the thing clawed at the ground, trying to right itself. More branches snapped around him. The mutilated revenants began tumbling down, their screams growing louder and more vengeful. Panic surged as he realized he was surrounded. Spinning around, he caught sight of the Cadillac, still idling patiently on the trail. Its side door remained open, and Sarah's face peeked out, her lips curved into a delighted smile. Freedom or safety, mister? What's it going to be? She called, her voice teasing as she disappeared back inside. The revenant's howls were closing in. His heart pounding, Garland turned and sprinted back to the car, diving into the back seat and slamming the door shut behind him. He gasped for air, his chest heaving. You chose wrong. Again, Sarah said flatly, sitting with her hands neatly folded in her lap. But don't worry, you're safe now. I'd never let those lumbering brutes damage Daddy Darling's beautiful Cadillac. How? How the hell are you controlling those things? What are you? Garland demanded, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and fury. Sarah turned to him, her black eyes shimmering like liquid shadows. She smiled, wide and unsettling. Why, Mr. Garland, I'm homeschooled, she said in a lilting voice. When your home is a tiny, dimension-bending microcosm between realities, it's amazing what a clever girl can learn. Garland's fears shifted into anger as his mind raced. He didn't believe a word she said, but his thoughts churned, trying to devise a way to escape, or perhaps even exact revenge. Oh, Sarah teased, her tone sing-song. You're thinking about taking me hostage, aren't you? So ungrateful. If it weren't for me, you'd still be out there, cold and wet. I gave you a choice, Mr. Garland, and you made it. If you're unhappy with the outcome, well, that's on you. Son, John's voice cut in coldly from the driver's seat, his eyes sharp in the rearview mirror. I don't take kindly to anyone threatening my girls, whether they mean it or not. I'm sure you understand. I didn't say anything, Garland muttered, retreating into the corner of the seat as far from Sarah as he could, his hands stuffed into his pockets. But John's icy stare lingered, and Garland knew there would be no room for error. You were thinking about grabbing me, weren't you, Mr. Garland? Sarah's voice broke through the tense silence, her tone both playful and accusing. You thought about putting me in a chokehold, demanding Daddy Darling turn the car around. You were sure you could snap my neck fast enough to keep my parents from tearing you apart. You wanted to make me cry, to wipe this smug grin off my face. Is that really all it takes to make you want to hurt a little girl, Mr. Garland? That's not very nice. But you know what? I'd like to see you crying. And what I want matters a lot more than what you want. Daddy Darling, floor it. Without hesitation, John slammed on the gas, sending the Cadillac rocketing down the dirt road. The force pinned Garland against his seat as the engine roared and the car weaved through the dense forest. But even above the sound of the tires ripping through mud and gravel, the howls of the revenants pierced through, a rabid, unnatural cacophony as they galloped after the car on all fours, completely devoid of self-preservation. "What the hell is happening now?" Garland shouted, craning his neck to see the horde crashing through the forest in relentless pursuit. "I infused them with one thing," Sarah said cheerily, her face the picture of innocence despite her words. "An insatiable hunger for human flesh. It's the only thing they can feel now. No thoughts, no doubts, just the all-consuming need to feed. And here I thought I struggled with temptation," Lisa quipped, glancing back at the horde through the rear window. "Even the promise of fresh meat doesn't turn me into such a slobbering beast. I'd need the thrill of the hunt first, at least." "Well, Mary darling, in fairness, you made steak and eggs for breakfast this morning," John replied with a chuckle, skillfully navigating around the trees. "These poor things haven't had a decent meal in ages. They're going to eat us." "You're insane. This whole family is completely insane!" Garland screamed, his panic growing with every passing second. "Oh, calm down," Lisa said dismissively, taking a drag from her cigarette. "They're completely under Sarah's control. She's Daddy Darling's little princess. She'd never let anything happen to his precious Cadillac." "True, Mommy darling," Sarah chimed in with a mischievous grin. "But what if Daddy Darling took such a sharp turn that poor Mr. Garland here slammed into the door so hard it flew open? Then the revenants could gobble him up without scratching the car." As if summoned by Sarah's words, or her will, a sharp bend appeared in the road ahead. John didn't hesitate, keeping his foot on the gas as he veered around it at breakneck speed. The force threw Garland sideways, slamming him against the door. It burst open, and he tumbled out of the car, hitting the muddy forest floor with a sickening thud. Before he could scramble to his feet, the revenants were on him, their clawed hands pinning him down. He thrashed and kicked, but there were too many. Hands immobilized his arms and legs with an iron grip, and he braced himself for the searing pain of teeth and claws tearing into his flesh. But the attack never came. The creatures, acting on Sarah's whims, lifted Garland above their heads and carried him forward, his limbs flailing uselessly. They didn't stop until they reached a clearing deep within the heart of the woods, where the air felt heavier, charged with an ancient, sinister energy. In the center of the glade stood a massive, crumbling well of black stones. It was enormous, 13 feet across, with a staircase of 7 uneven steps leading up to its rim. Garland's breath caught as he saw the Cadillac already parked nearby. The Darlings had exited the car, and John was hauling their earlier victim from the trunk. She was limp, barely conscious, and Garland's stomach twisted with dread. "Don't feel bad, Mr. Garland," Sarah said sweetly as the revenants unceremoniously dropped him at her feet. Her voice was calm, her expression serene, eerily so. "You couldn't have helped her. How could you? You couldn't even help yourself." The revenants scattered into the woods without a sound, leaving Garland sprawled on the ground. He looked up at Sarah, frozen by the unsettling calm in her gaze. She stood over him like a queen surveying her subject, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. He didn't dare move. He didn't dare speak. For now, all he could do was wait. "That's much better," Sarah said, flashing Garland a grin that dripped with satisfaction. "It was my idea to pick you up, Mr. Garland, so it's only fair I get to decide what happens to you. Feeding you to the revenants would have been a waste, but I'm still weighing my options. Dead or alive, taking you back to the playroom seems like more trouble than you're worth, but maybe you'll surprise me. For now, stay put and keep quiet while my parents and I take care of business. I'll deal with you after." Without another glance, she turned her back on him and strolled toward her father, showing no concern about securing him. "How's our offering holding up, Daddy Darling?" she asked. John hefted the limp, catatonic woman over his shoulder and gave her a testing shake. "At first, I worried she might have died during the ride, didn't get so much as a twitch out of her. Turns out she's just dead on the inside. No use as a plaything now, and not enough meat to make a meal of. She'll serve the bile just fine." Sarah tilted the woman's head upward, gripping her cheeks to force eye contact. Her black, fluid-like eyes rippled as she delved deep into the broken woman's mind, plumbing the darkest recesses of her shattered psyche. We broke her so thoroughly that only the bile can make anything of her now, Sarah declared. Her life holds no value to herself or anyone else. It's only right we offer her to the one who can still find a use for her. She turned on her heel and ascended the ancient, crumbling staircase to the well's edge, her parents close behind. The well was impossibly deep, its bottom obscured by impenetrable darkness. Not that it mattered, they knew what waited below. A low chorus of guttural whispers began to rise from the depths, reverberating up the stone walls in a language long dead. The words weren't meant for mortal ears, but their meaning was clear: anticipation. Sarah stood at the edge, her black pupils expanding until they consumed her entire eyes. Her voice rang with reverence as she began to speak. Moros the All-Destroyer, god of doom, death, and suffering. Scion of the primordial night and the primeval dark, kin to reapers, valkyries, and the fates themselves. Greater are you than the Olympians, the Titans, and all others who would claim omnipotence, she intoned. While hope lay trapped in Pandora's box, doom seeped out to rot the world from within. While Moloch gnaws at the roots of the world tree and Yaldabaoth devours it from above, your incarnate bile seeps in from every crack in the firmament. We come to you today because, once again, we require your favor, great Moros. Her voice gained strength, a tone both commanding and reverent, as she continued. Those who follow the world serpent have turned against us, pledging themselves to Emrys, avatar of the darkness beyond the veil. Emrys seeks to destroy our family, and even now, shards of his miasmic blade remain lodged in my father's heart from a failed attack by his acolyte. Though his vendetta is personal, Emrys has aligned himself with the god-slaying Zarathustrans. Their ambitions threaten not only us but the very essence of your power, mighty Moros. From the depths of the well came a rumble, a low, ominous growl that sent a blast of foul wind swirling upward. The Darlings took it as a sign their patron deity was listening. The wilting Empress has been unleashed. The effulgent one roams freely between planes. Witches once again forge pacts with chthonic powers. A great battle is on the horizon, a clash of titans and their followers. In this coming iconoclasm, we pledge ourselves to you. We offer this sacrifice to renew our covenant and beg for your strength. Purge my father of the miasmic taint that hinders him, so he may fight for you with all his power. May all rot and decay beneath the black bile of Moros. Sarah stepped back from the edge, bowing her head with respect. She turned to John, signaling it was his turn to approach the well. With a solid heave, John hurled the near-lifeless woman into the well. Her body disappeared into the darkness, falling for several seconds before landing in the black bile below with a nauseating, wet splat. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the screams, piercing, guttural cries as the bile invaded her body, twisting and remaking her into something else entirely. The sound of her torment echoed up the shaft. Can't imagine what she's so upset about, John quipped, his voice dripping with mockery. She was halfway to being a zombie already. Before anyone could reply, his body stiffened. He grunted as a searing sensation rippled through his chest. The miasmic shards lodged in his heart were shifting, guided with surgical precision by the black bile coursing through his veins. Each fragment moved in short bursts, the process careful enough to minimize damage to the surrounding tissue. Then, with a sudden, wrenching jolt, the shards aligned perfectly. One by one, they shot out of his chest, vanishing into the swirling vortex and plunging into the depths of the well. John cried out, dropping to his knees as he clutched at his chest. But the pain, though sharp, ebbed as quickly as it came. The wounds closed almost instantly, healing at a speed that defied nature. "Daddy!" Sarah gasped. "John! John, darling, are you all right?" Lisa knelt beside him, her face painted with concern. "Yes," John said, his voice shaking with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Yes. It's gone. Completely gone." He let out a laugh that echoed through the glade. "Emrys doesn't have that hanging over us anymore. Lisa and Sarah wrapped their arms around him, their shared relief spilling over into joyous laughter. They were so caught up in their triumph that none of them noticed Garland creeping closer. He had been watching from the shadows, waiting for his chance. The darlings seemed to have completely forgotten about him. They were mere meters away now, distracted and vulnerable. Garland's original plan had been to push the girl into the well, but with all three of them so close, he decided to take his chance on all of them at once. Silent as a predator, he lunged forward, putting every ounce of strength into his charge. But just as he closed the distance, a sharp, unnatural wail rose from the well. The sound hit him like a physical force, and in the next instant, a strange dagger shot upward, piercing straight through his forehead. The impact flung him backward, his body hitting the ground with a lifeless thud. He was dead before he could register what had happened. The darlings turned at the sound, their expressions calm as they walked toward Garland's body. They stood over him, their eyes fixed on the dagger that had killed him. "Is that?" Lisa started, her voice trailing off as if afraid to say the words aloud. Tentatively, Sarah reached out, wrapping her fingers around the hilt. She pulled the blade free, revealing a serpentine design made of the very miasmic shards Moros had extracted from her father's heart. The fragments were bound together by vitrified and gilded black bile, its once volatile nature rendered inert. The blade shimmered, eerie and otherworldly, in the dim light. "It's beautiful," Sarah breathed, her black eyes wide with wonder. She turned to Lisa, holding the dagger out to her. "Here, Mommy darling. You're the best with knives, and since it came from Daddy darling's heart, it's only rightfully yours." "Why, thank you, Sarah darling," Lisa said, taking the weapon with a graceful nod. Her eyes glinted as she turned it over in her hands, studying its craftsmanship. The longer she held the blade, the more her smile twisted into something wicked. Her eyes gleamed with a dark realization, and at last, she couldn't contain it any longer. Welcome to Story Scary Boo. We are dedicated to sharing immersive and authentic stories, presented as true experiences submitted by individuals from various backgrounds. Our goal is to provide engaging and thought-provoking content that explores the mysterious, the unsettling, and the unexplained. Each story on this channel is presented as a true account, rooted in the experiences of those who have faced unusual or eerie situations. While we ensure these stories remain true to their origins, minor creative adjustments may be made to enhance clarity and emotional impact. However, we are committed to maintaining the integrity and intent of each story, treating each subject matter with the respect and sincerity it deserves. We take YouTube's policies very seriously. All content shared on this channel is carefully reviewed to comply with YouTube's community guidelines and content standards. We avoid graphic or harmful details, ensuring that our storytelling is suitable for a wide audience. Content involving sensitive or potentially distressing themes is handled with care, keeping our viewers' comfort in mind. Our stories often delve into the supernatural and explore unsettling topics that may not be suitable for everyone. We recommend viewer discretion, especially for those sensitive to themes of the paranormal or psychological suspense. Our goal is to deliver content that is both respectful and captivating, with a focus on creating a safe, welcoming environment for all viewers. We value your feedback and are constantly striving to improve our content. If you have concerns, suggestions, or personal stories to share, please feel free to reach out. We are committed to creating content that is engaging, respectful, and aligned with YouTube's standards. Thank you for being part of our community, and for joining us on this journey into the unknown.